Welcome, Chuka Umunna.
Hi, John.
Newest member of the Liberal Democrats. Now, you've been very rude about the Liberal Democrats in the past. Are they not just a sort of convenient dumping ground where any politician who doesn't actually fit into any of the other parties finds themselves ending up?
No. Funny I should say that. I'm a social democrat with liberal values. I believe in a free and open society. I'm a Keynesian who believes in a mixed market economy that is strong and fair and enables people to achieve their dreams and aspirations regardless of their background. I believe that we need to completely overhaul our ridiculous constitution and the way our democracy works. And above all, I'm unapologetically an internationalist, which is why I think leaving the European Union is a disaster. Those are Liberal Democrat values.
So why didn't you go straight into the Liberal Democrats when you left the Labour Party?
Because there were two or three things, actually. I think, first of all, my belief at the time, and I only left the Labour Party in February, was that amongst the millions of progressively minded, politically homeless people in our country, people wanted a new party. That was what my analysis was. And it turns out, if you look at the two national elections there have been, the local elections in England and the European elections across the whole of the UK, it turns out that that isn't what people wanted in the progressive, pro-European centre ground of British politics. They actually wanted those sitting in that political space to come together, to work as closely as possible together and to consolidate. And I thought you can either put your head in the sand and ignore that, or actually take heed of what people are asking for. And I think the second thing is that if you are trying to give birth to a new political party in a system of proportional representation, as it was in the European elections with Change UK, and it's not able to succeed in that context, it certainly is not going to gain traction in a first-past-the-post setting, the system used in Westminster elections. And it's clear in that scenario that there's only space for one main centre ground proposition. And so that's why, those are the two reasons why I suppose I didn't join the Liberal Democrats in the first instance, because that was my analysis. And in fairness, actually, I think a lot of people at all levels of the Liberal Democrats who I spoke to shortly after I left the Labour Party, they tended to kind of agree with my kind of turned out mistaken analysis of the situation then.
Well, they wanted you to set up a new party.
There were broad discussions which were fairly non-tribal, frankly, about how do we ensure that the progressive, radical centre ground of British politics can prevail at the next general election. And people were not precious about how to do that. I think one of the big issues that overlays the reasons why there isn't a desire for a new party and why it's so hard for things to succeed in a first-past-the-post setting in terms of having more than one centre ground party is that I massively underestimated just how important it is to have an existing party infrastructure.
Yeah.
And part of the problem that we had in Change UK was that we were trying to basically run a national campaign in the European elections without any infrastructure at all, but build as we went along. That's proved absolutely impossible to do. The other thing I should mention, actually, obviously, one of the things, and you talked about me having been rude about the Liberal Democrats in the past, it wasn't about the values or principles of liberal democracy, which are mine.
Yeah.
But obviously it is the austerity that was pursued by the 2010 to 2015 coalition government. And what I would say to people like me who, are previous Labour voters who hesitate about whether or not to support the Liberal Democrats at a general election is our party has changed. The Liberal Democrats have changed since that time. They have voted against every single Conservative budget since 2010. They stood, and we are being true to a anti-austerity 2017 Liberal Democrat manifesto, which committed, for example, to raising tax to pay for the NHS, reversing, for example, cuts to housing benefit, the cuts to universal credit. And ultimately, actually, if austerity is what you're concerned about, I argue that you cannot sponsor Brexit, as both the two main parties are doing, and be anti-austerity. The Liberal Democrats from the get-go after that 2016 EU referendum were absolutely against leaving the European Union, were promoting a people's vote and wanting to remain in the European Union, which is the ultimate way that you can stop austerity in this country.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. Look at those things. and senior figures in the party, including Vince, the current leader, Vince Cable, have said that mistakes were made in coalition. They should never have, for example, allowed something like the bedroom tax to go through, in spite of the fact that they curbed many of the worst successes of George Osborne. And obviously a mistake was made in making that pledge and then breaking that pledge on tuition fees.
Indeed.
But I don't think we should let past differences stand in the way of us working together for a greater goal, which is to disrupt the two-party system, realign British politics, and ensure that the radical centre ground can actually get in and be in a position to change people's lives. And that's what politics should be about.
Sure, and I think a lot of people would be very sympathetic to that, and they're very sympathetic to politicians who admit to changing their minds. I mean, you see how successful Rory Stewart has been in the Tory leadership campaign. But are you not worried that people are getting a sense from you that you change your mind too often? That you initially said that we had to leave the EU and we had to end free movement, and now you're full on Remain. And,
well, I didn't actually say that, and this is the thing, is that the kind of populists on the extreme of British politics on the left and the right see everything in black and white terms.
Yeah.
They refuse to acknowledge the nuance. They refuse to frankly acknowledge the modern tapestry of Britain, which is a complex and diverse thing. And I said, first of all, we had to try and deliver Brexit, Parliament that is, in the terms that was promised to the British people in 2016. But now you think I caveated that by saying that it'd be perfectly legitimate if that proved to be impossible, if you couldn't square the circle, in referring it back to the British people. I said that in a speech in the House of Commons at the end of 2016, shortly after that vote. And secondly, I never said that I was against the principle of free movement. What I said is that it needed to be reformed in terms of the way it's implemented in our country.
Fair enough, but you know what people say about you.
I know,
because you ran for the you sort of ran for the Labour leadership in 2015 and then pulled out. People say you're not constant.
I think I am not ultra ideological, but my principles and values have been constant. And if, as things change, I think, some people say, what is it to be progressive? I've written a whole pamphlet on this, because we're all very good at saying what we're against, the extremes of left and right, but what are we actually for in the progressive centre ground of British politics? And for me, those, my values have been constant, but you can't ignore what's happening around you. If I just ignored, for example, the local and European elections and ploughed on and said, yes, there is space for another main centre ground party in this country, then that would be ridiculous. So actually looking at the facts and the evidence, if that drives you to a different course or different avenue, then that shouldn't be a problem. And I think what it is to be progressive is to adapt and change to the facts and the circumstances of the world as we find it, instead of seeking to bang on about some old ideology that was written up for Britain of the past.
But you haven't persuaded your other colleagues in Change UK to come with you. I mean,
well,
do you think they're going to?
I think, well, those who are still in Change UK have a different conception of how we get the centre ground to prevail in this context, and they believe that Change UK should be standing candidates at the next general election. I didn't, which is why.
Do you think they'll come round to your point of view eventually?
They may well do. They may well do, as the facts continue to change. In terms of the colleagues who also left Change UK, I think they're revelling in being independent again, having been slightly scarred from being in the party structure of the two main parties and then the challenges that we had in Change UK. So I think they'll revel in that independence a little bit longer, but I'm certainly hoping to be able to, encourage them to come and join the Liberal Democrats too. And I think, there are a number of colleagues, not just who left Change UK, but actually who are in the Conservative and Labour parties, who I could see doing that in the coming months. But people have got, everyone's on their own journey and they have to find the destination themselves. It's not for me to dictate to somebody to do something. But I knew, to be honest, before the European election result, what I thought was going on. The results confirmed it. And I also think that you cannot allow kind of tribalism or, past differences get in the way of actually doing what is in the national interest, which is what I think people want us to do.
But, OK, so the Liberal Democrats are very successful in the European elections because they posed as the main advocates of Remain. Will they not have a problem over the next year or two if the Labour Party, for example, comes out in favour of a referendum and moves into the sort of territory that you're now in?
I don't think so, for a number of reasons. First of all, what's wrong with the Labour Party is not only its position on Brexit. When I left the Labour Party in February and we formed the independent group, Brexit was one of a number of issues that we cited in addition to the fact that they have an institutional anti-Semitism issue. This is an institutionally racist party which is currently under investigation by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I don't think that issue is going to go away anytime soon. It is a party that has a leadership and is sponsoring that leadership that too often parrots narratives of states hostile to the UK in foreign and defence policy matters. Just give you an example, this controversy around the attack on these oil tankers, and whether or not it was Iran or not in that region of the world. The Labour leadership prefers to believe other narratives and ignore what British intelligence and security forces are telling us about what happened in that situation. Now that again is not going to go away as an issue, and I think the other issue is just that the culture of that party, of the Labour Party, which is aggressive. There's a visceral hatred of people with other views, which unfortunately is not something I would say is the case in respect of all Labour members, but is too frequently a feature of Labour circles. So I don't think any of that's going to change, and people do have doubts about whether they would entrust not just our national security but our economic security to the top team in the Labour Party. I think that the challenge for those of us in the radical centre ground is to show not only that obviously we want to stop Brexit, but actually is to show that we are best placed, and our politics is best placed to address the causes of Brexit, why people voted to leave the European Union in the first place, and illustrate how we will transform our economy, which needs to be fundamentally overhauled so that it can marry together social justice, ensuring that we can get globalisation to work better for middle and lower income families in an advanced economy like ours, with economic competence, and that we can credibly deliver these things. And that's not ignoring, that's economic, I talk about the big cultural issues that we've got in this country and the divisions that we have, and how on earth do we become a more socially integrated country as well.
Sure, but Brexit is going to be the dominant question for the foreseeable future. Do you think we're ever going to leave? Do you think Boris Johnson, for example, can actually get us out of the European Union?
I think he could. It depends on whether he is prepared to do what Theresa May wasn't, which is to challenge the hard right of his party. I think the problem is he is now of the hard right. He is not the Boris Johnson who stood for the mayoralty in London twice and won. And I also think it's not just his policy positions, because frankly he's repeating so many of the errors of Theresa May, which is basically dancing to the tune of the hard right, which are a minority group in British society. But I think there's another issue, which is a very practical one, is I know from people close to Boris, because I've spoken to them about this, Boris Johnson, that his conception of being Prime Minister is operating like a president, as the chair of the corporation, who swims in and out but doesn't really get his hands dirty in the detail and rolls his sleeves up and does the hard work. He'll get other underlings to do that for him. That doesn't work as Prime Minister. You have to be on top of the detail. It is not the kind of thing where you can operate like a chair. You are the chief executive, and he is trying to upend that. He will try, when he becomes Prime Minister, which I believe he will, to do it differently, and he's going to come a crop up because we don't have a presidential system in this country.
Do you think we will eventually get a referendum on the EU? Is that how we're going to stay in?
If he is as determined as many people in the Conservative are to avoid an early general election,
which he is, then really having a people's vote is the only way of avoiding the impasse. And I don't detect amongst those I speak to in the different institutions of the European Union that they are going to revise the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May negotiated. Yeah. There may be some manoeuvre around the backstop, but essentially those ingredients are going to be the same. And so I don't see how he's going to be able to get around that. And if he can't get around that, you still will have the impasse, and you end up with a people's vote. But what I would say is, if we have a general election, it may happen more by accident than design. We could easily trip into that. MPs would have to vote for it, wouldn't they?
They would, and
in some form.
And if he, does what he says he's going to do, which is try and pursue a no-deal Brexit, if the worst comes to the worst, then I think there's a good chance that a number of Tory MPs will withdraw confidence in their own government, or vote for a people's vote when they wouldn't have otherwise done so. So it's very up in the air. I mean, I suspect what he'll do is he'll find a good excuse as to why actually we're not going to go at the end of October, and then get a further extension perhaps to April or October next year.
But
And
that's
then
a terrible betrayal of the people who put him there, isn't it?
It might be, but he will say that if we don't have a deal, we will use this period to prepare for a managed no deal. And he could arrive in office and say, look, I didn't realise how unprepared we are currently for no deal. And I'm going, we will get this extension till April to allow the wind down. And then...
But we still know that Parliament is going to block
but then,
even a managed no deal.
Then he'll prepare, not just for no deal, but for a general election in April, May next year.
Right.
Because that is how I could see a general election coming about. He goes for a further extension, uses it to do a managed no deal, and Parliament says no, and then that precipitates a general election or a referendum.
And the Liberal Democrats are ready for a general election, are they?
Absolutely. We have an existing infrastructure, and I think the European elections have shown, what a strength that is. And one of the really encouraging thing I found on becoming a member of the Liberal Democrats is I don't find an arrogant, complacent party drunk on recent success, thinking, oh right, that's it. We're back on our way to success. It's not that at all. There is a real sense that we can't rest on our laurels. We need to further expand the bandwidth of the party. We need to be going into a general election with, polling at least 20% or more, so that we can really fulfil the historic opportunity there is to fix our broken politics, end this two-party system. And there's a real determination and focus to do that, not only in the party, but amongst both of the candidates to be leader, Ed and Joe.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chuka. I can't let you go without asking you for a music recommendation, because I'm always on the lookout for good new music. You're a former DJ. I don't suppose you get a chance to listen to music as much as you did.
Do you know what we're loving in my household? Georgia Smith. Brilliant upcoming talent in her 20s from Wolverhampton. She is touring the world, supporting some of the biggest names in music, and she is just a breath of fresh air. So go and check her out. Georgia Smith. Check her album out on Spotify.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Brilliant.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Chuka.
Cheers.